The Final Fantasy IX Remake needs to happen. It's been talked about for years, but I feel like the time for it to arrive is inevitable now. Final Fantasy IX is probably my favorite Final Fantasy game overall. Maybe not from a pure gameplay perspective, but just from its action elements, amazing story, great characters, and immaculate, dark, cartoony medieval setting. This game truly took the series back to its roots during a time it was straying very far from it, trying to tackle more sci-fi and steampunk-esque themes. I think the first question that comes from a Final Fantasy IX Remake discussion is why? Why Final Fantasy IX when 7 is a game getting remade right now, so it only makes sense to jump to 8? Well, the answer is pretty simple. The push for 9 in the past years, both within community and from Square Enix themselves, has been very strong. Although people initially hated the game when it released and saw it as a lesser than the more mature, robust titles, there has been a massive switch within the community in just the past decade. This game has found a massive cult following, with many agreeing that it's up there with 6, 7, and 10 as the best game in the series. It's a fairy tale of death that brings back the classic medieval theme of Final Fantasy from 1 through 5. Not only does the community love Final Fantasy IX now, but Square does too. The push for Final Fantasy IX from Square has been immaculate. Anniversary events, a lot of merchandise, a potential new animated series about the Black Mages, and of course, the infamous 2021 NVIDIA leak about Final Fantasy IX Remake. And this brings us to today's topic. Before I get into why I strongly believe a Final Fantasy IX Remake would greatly benefit this game's legacy, I just want to say I believe that this remake is happening. Yes, there have been claims that it's been facing development hell, delays, and even the fact that the project as a whole is on one big pause, but I personally believe most of this is to do with the fact that the Final Fantasy IX Remake just can't happen right now. First off, the Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's not over. We are still awaiting Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, which may not come until 2027 or 2028. All I have to say is that why would Square announce a Final Fantasy IX Remake in the middle of the Final Fantasy VII Remake hype train? Although we technically already got Final Fantasy remakes before Rebirth and the Pixel remasters or even Tactics, we have still yet to see a full-fledged remake like the 7 remake be announced. So it's only logical Square is waiting until the 7 remake trilogy is wrapped up to announce or get ahead on a big AAA project like the Final Fantasy IX Remake. With all that said, let's get into the meat of the video. Why does this need to happen? Although Final Fantasy IX has an amazing story, memorable characters, and even a great sense of turn-based combat, these are all also the reasons why a Final Fantasy IX Remake is somewhat required. I think my biggest problem with Final Fantasy IX was that the story felt like it was rushing itself during certain segments. You can really feel that late development rush later into the game. Characters like Zidane, Dagger, and Vivi obviously got enough time to develop greatly, but I fear characters like Steiner, Quina, Freya, and especially Amarith were pushed to the side too much or simply not expanded on enough. Steiner definitely got more development and representation compared to Quina and Freya, but despite this, I feel like he just did not have enough to him. There was no backstory. He didn't have enough interactions with the rest of the cast. I mean, just for an example, I cannot name one interaction Steiner had with Freya. Quina was obviously just a gag character who didn't need much development, but I really do feel like they deserved more screen time and interactions, as they're just not there for the majority of the story. And as for Amarith, he definitely had a ton of meaningful scenes with Zidane, but without a backstory or more of a deeper explanation of his character, he overall just felt underdeveloped and more like a shoo-in to strengthen the narrative at its end. Needless to say, the main goal of a Final Fantasy IX Remake, aside from faster and more defined gameplay and updated graphics, should be an expansion to the story, developments to the rest of the cast, a Queen Branhe boss fight, and a more evenly paced mid-game. And while we're at it, hopefully a lot more side quests to hammer in interactions and replay value. Something I feel the Final Fantasy IX Remake should avoid is the mistake Square made with the 7 Remake. Try not to make this some big trilogy that forces a main villain down your throat from start to end. One of my favorite parts of Final Fantasy IX is the fact that Kuja is sidelined hard until he defeats Queen Branhe. The entire game had me believe Queen Branhe was the main villain. She felt imposing, powerful, and ruthless. I really do hope Queen Queen Bronhe gets more representation in this remake, as I just certainly felt like she was fitting for it. Aside from Queen Bronhe though, Kuja was just such a great villain in Final Fantasy IX. I just loved how he was overshadowed in Burmecia by Beatrix and Bronhe, but then he would slowly start to reveal himself to be manipulating Queen Bronhe. He would then eventually grow to be this unstoppable threat that would amplify the whole narrative of the game's story based on death. I really hope they keep this flow going in the remake and they don't just shoo him in at the start or something, or overshadow Queen Bronhe. Now, onto the gameplay itself, I am personally split on if this should be a more gritty, realistic remake with real-time combat akin to the modern Final Fantasy titles, while nurturing some of that cartoony aesthetic, or if it should just stay true to its cartoony nature 100% and be a more pudgy remake with improved turn-based combat. Something like the Dragon Quest VII remake for say. At the end of the day, as long as it doesn't take 4 hours to get in and out of a battle, I'm content with either. Now, one part of the Final Fantasy IX remake discussion that I wanted to bring my attention to is the argument that we already have an official remaster. Final Fantasy IX was remastered from 2016 to 2019 on all current platforms in HD, alongside a whole bunch of cheats that serve more as band-aid solutions than official quality of life changes. Although I think it's cool you can experience the original game on all platforms, I don't really love this remaster, and I sure as hell still believe a genuine remake is necessary. The Final Fantasy IX remaster may have HD graphics and enhanced character textures, but something it doesn't have is widescreen support, faster load times between fights, and of course, bonus content. The cheats may be optional, but having the option to turn your character into an unstoppable god with one press of a button is just a poor way to make the game more accessible to less experienced players. The argument to just not use it is obviously there, but at the same time, we can't be void to criticism. Who wouldn't? Who would not take that opportunity? It's like dangling a piece of steak in front of a hungry dog. It gives a player less incentive to try. But at the end of the day, the need for a better paced and better told version of Final Fantasy IX with stronger character development and out-of-this-world visuals is still there. Whether that be through redefined turn-based combat with accessibility options, or just a modern-day real-time combat system, this is a Final Fantasy game that has always stood out compared to the rest, and for that reason alone, I think it deserves to be revitalized and revisited for a new generation. And of course, for those who originally did not see the appeal. With all that said, make sure to like and subscribe and comment what you would like to see in a Final Fantasy IX remake. Hell, even tell me what Final Fantasy game you think deserves a modern-day AAA remake. Personally, if not for 9, I'd argue 2 deserves some sort of big retelling. With all that said, I will see you guys next time.